Most people, when they see a child in danger, freeze for at least 3 seconds. Their minds stutter, processing the impossibility of real violence interrupting their ordinary Tuesday. They fumble for their phones, shout for help, or simply stand there with their mouths open, paralysed by the collision between their safe assumptions and brutal reality. Sophia Moreau did none of those things. At exactly 9:47 p.m. on a rain-soaked Thursday in November, she was balancing 4 plates of ossobuco on her left arm while calculating whether her tips would cover both her mother's medication and the overdue electric bill. The arithmetic was grim. Her uniform, once crisp white, now bore the battle scars of a 14-hour double shift. Marinara sauce on her sleeve, coffee stains across her apron, and the particular exhaustion that seeped through cheap fabric and settled into bone. Romano's family restaurant wasn't the kind of place that attracted attention. Tucked between a dry cleaner and a check-cashing store on the east side of the city, it survived on red sauce, reasonable prices, and the peculiar loyalty of customers who valued consistency over innovation. The walls were lined with faded photographs of Sicily and plastic grapevines that collected dust. The air always smelled of garlic, oregano, and the faint desperation of small business owners stretching every dollar. Sophia had been invisible here for 8 months, perfectly, professionally invisible. She moved through the dining room like smoke, anticipating needs before customers voiced them, refilling water glasses before they emptied, clearing plates with the silent efficiency that separated career servers from college kids picking up beer money. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun that revealed nothing about the face beneath. No makeup, no jewellery, nothing that invited conversation or lingered in memory. The customers saw her hands, they saw the food. They never saw her eyes. Tonight's crowd was typical for a Thursday. 3 elderly couples celebrating nothing in particular, a businessman eating alone while typing furiously on his phone, and a young mother trying to convince her toddler that spaghetti belonged in his mouth rather than on the floor. Sophia served them all with the same courteous distance, her movements economical and forgettable. She was carrying the last round of dinner plates to table 6 when her peripheral vision caught the anomaly. A man in the corner booth wasn't eating. His osso buco sat untouched while he watched the restaurant with the systematic attention of someone cataloguing exits, blind spots, and potential threats. His suit was charcoal grey, tailored to a terrifying perfection that cost more than Romano's annual revenue. His hands, folded on the white tablecloth, bore no wedding ring, but several small scars that spoke of violence survived, rather than violence observed. Sophia's military-trained instincts, dormant for 3 years but never truly dead, whispered warnings she couldn't afford to hear. She set down the plates at table 6 with mechanical precision, accepted the customer's thanks with a professional smile, and retreated to the kitchen to prepare another pot of coffee. The rhythm of service was her meditation, her fortress against the hypervigilance that had cost her 6 jobs in 2 years. She counted steps, counted orders, counted tips, counted anything that would keep her mind locked in the present, instead of spiralling into the endless catalogue of things that could go wrong. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. A text from Mercy General Hospital. Mrs. Moreau missed her 3 p.m. appointment. Please reschedule at your earliest convenience. Sophia's hands went still on the coffee pot. Her mother's dementia was accelerating. Last week, she'd forgotten Sophia's name for the first time. This week, she was forgetting appointments. Next week, she might forget to breathe. The specialised care facility that could actually help her cost $4,000 a month. Sophia's 3 jobs, waitressing, overnight cleaning at an office building, and weekend catering, brought in maybe $2,800 on a good month. The arithmetic was simple and devastating. She finished brewing the coffee, carried the pot back to the dining room, and began her rounds. Table 2 needed more bread. Table 4 wanted their check. The businessman was ready for dessert, something chocolate and expensive enough to pad the bill. The man in the corner booth still hadn't touched his food. Sophia approached with the coffee pot, her server's mask locked firmly in place. "Can I warm that up for you, sir?" He looked up, and she felt the full weight of his attention like a physical force. His eyes were dark brown, almost black, with the particular intensity of someone who had learned to read people the way others read street signs. Survival skill, life or death skill. "The food is excellent," he said, his voice carrying the faintest trace of an Italian accent that money and education had almost, but not quite, erased. "I'm just not very hungry tonight." Sophia nodded, poured coffee he hadn't requested, and started to retreat. "You move like a soldier," he said quietly. Her hand tightened on the coffee pot handle. Not a question, an observation, a recognition. "I move like someone who's been serving tables for 8 months," she replied without turning around. "Excuse me, I have other customers." But as she walked away, carrying the coffee pot that suddenly felt heavy as a weapon, Sophia knew with crystalline certainty that her life had just shifted on its axis. The man in the corner booth wasn't just another customer. He was something else entirely, something that had been watching her. And now that she'd been seen, truly seen, for the first time in 3 years, Sophia Moreau understood that her carefully constructed invisibility was about to shatter completely. The rain kept falling against the windows, washing away the ordinary Thursday night that would be the last ordinary night of her life. 6 weeks into her new life, Sophia was conducting her evening security sweep when she noticed that Vincent Caruso's phone was receiving encrypted messages at 2:47 a.m. She shouldn't have been in the security office at that hour, should have been asleep in her quarters, trusting that the man Matteo had relied upon for 5 years was handling the compound's protection with his usual professional competence. But 8 years of military training had left Sophia with the kind of hypervigilance that treated sleep as optional and trust as something earned through verification rather than assumption. The message appeared on Vincent's secondary phone, the one he thought no one else knew about, in a burst of Cyrillic text that made Sophia's blood freeze in her veins. She couldn't read Russian fluently, but she recognized enough key phrases to understand that someone was discussing timetables, route changes, and the specific vulnerabilities of an 8-year-old boy who trusted his bodyguards completely. Sophia photographed the screen with her own phone, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system like liquid fire. Military training had taught her to compartmentalize terror, to function efficiently even when every instinct screamed that everything she cared about was in immediate danger. Vincent was feeding information to the Volkov organization, had been doing so for months, perhaps years, slowly mapping Matteo's defenses and identifying the pressure points that would cause maximum damage when the time came to strike. The realization hit Sophia like a sniper's bullet, precise, devastating, and reshaping everything she thought she understood about the world she'd entered. Vincent had been the one to recommend previous nannies who'd lasted mere weeks before finding excuses to leave. Vincent had been the one managing Luca's security details, ensuring that gaps appeared at precisely the right moments. Vincent had been positioning himself not just as Matteo's trusted lieutenant, but as Luca's guardian in the event of his father's death. The inheritance plan was elegant in its simplicity. Eliminate Matteo in a way that appeared to be enemy action. Console the grieving son while managing his substantial trust fund. Gradually assume control of business operations while the boy grew up believing that Uncle Vincent was the only family he had left. Sophia stared at the evidence on her phone screen, calculating response times and tactical options with the systematic precision that had kept her unit alive through 8 years of hostile territory. She could confront Vincent directly, but without additional proof. It would be her word against a man who had spent 5 years earning Matteo's absolute trust. She could present the evidence to Matteo immediately, but that would force a confrontation that might trigger Vincent to accelerate his timeline. Or she could do what soldiers did when they discovered that the enemy had infiltrated their defences. She could wait, watch, and prepare for war. Over the next 3 days, Sophia maintained her routine with the disciplined normalcy of someone conducting deep cover surveillance. She read Luca bedtime stories about brave knights and clever dragons. She helped him with homework that was advanced for his age, but appropriate for a child who would someday inherit an empire. She shared late-night kitchen conversations with Matteo that danced around the growing attraction neither was willing to acknowledge directly. And she documented every anomaly in the compound security protocols with the methodical attention of someone building a case that could save or damn everyone she'd learned to love. Vincent's phone received encrypted communications every Tuesday and Friday at precisely the same times. The messages always preceded minor adjustments to Matteo's schedule. Meetings moved to different locations, route changes for school pickups, staff assignments that created gaps in coverage during vulnerable windows. Sophia began carrying a concealed weapon during her walks with Luca, something she'd avoided during her first weeks to maintain the illusion that his protection was casual rather than tactical. She memorized backup escape routes from every room in the compound, identifying choke points and defensive positions that could buy them precious seconds if the walls were breached. Most dangerously, she started training Luca without his knowledge that it was training. "Want to play a game?" she'd ask during their afternoon walks through the gardens. "Let's see who can get from the fountain to the garage the fastest, using only the hedge maze." Luca thought he was racing. Sophia was teaching him evasion routes. "Let's practice our whisper voices," she'd suggest during quiet time before dinner. "Sometimes it's fun to be so quiet that no one knows we're there." Luca thought they were being sneaky. Sophia was teaching him how to hide. "What's the most important thing to remember if someone you don't know tries to talk to you?" she'd ask while they fed Napoleon his evening meal. "Find you or Papa immediately," Luca would recite dutifully. "And never, ever go anywhere with strangers, even if they say it's okay." Luca thought these were safety rules. Sophia was preparing him for kidnapping. On Thursday evening, Vincent's phone buzzed with a message that made Sophia's carefully controlled world explode into fragments. "Tomorrow, 3 p.m. school pickup route compromised, target isolated, payment on completion." Sophia stared at the text until her vision blurred, the implications cascading through her tactical awareness like dominoes, falling in perfect, terrible sequence. Matteo had a meeting with the other families tomorrow afternoon, his monthly obligation that required his presence and most of his security detail. Luca would be at school until 3:15, picked up by Sophia and driven home along a route that Vincent had suggested 3 weeks ago for its efficiency and discretion. A route that would take them through 2 construction zones and past an abandoned warehouse district where screams wouldn't carry to populated areas. Vincent wasn't just feeding information to the Volkoffs, he was actively arranging for Luca's kidnapping, ensuring that Matteo would face the choice between his territory and his son's life, a choice that would destroy him regardless of which option he selected. Sophia's hands shook as she photographed the message, but not from fear, from rage so pure and focused that it felt like a religious experience. She had watched friends die in Afghanistan when intelligence failures put them in the wrong place at the wrong time. She had lived with survivor's guilt for 3 years, wondering why she had been spared when better soldiers had paid the ultimate price. Now she understood why she had survived. She had survived to stand between Vincent Caruso and an 8-year-old boy who drew pictures of dragons and asked for extra marshmallows in his hot chocolate. She had survived to be the weapon that Matteo didn't know he needed, the soldier who would do whatever was necessary to protect the family that had given her a reason to live again. Sophia deleted the photographs from her phone and destroyed the evidence of her surveillance. Tomorrow, Vincent would expect his plan to unfold smoothly, his betrayal to remain hidden until it was too late for countermeasures. He was about to discover that some soldiers were very good at keeping secrets, and even better at making problems disappear permanently. Sophia spent the rest of the evening playing Legos with Luca, helping him construct an elaborate fortress complete with towers, walls, and multiple escape routes. To him, It was a game about protecting treasure from dragons. To Sophia, it was a promise. Tomorrow, Vincent Caruso would learn the difference between a woman who served coffee and a soldier who had sworn to protect everything that mattered, regardless of the cost. The difference, as Derek Walsh had discovered too late, was everything. At exactly 3 p.m. on Friday afternoon, Sophia Moreau became a killer again. She had hoped it wouldn't come to that. Had spent the morning calculating alternatives, tactical solutions that would neutralize Vincent's threat without adding another body to the count that haunted her dreams. But when she saw the black SUV with tinted windows parked 2 blocks from Luca's school, when she spotted the sniper's nest in the construction site Vincent had specifically routed them past, when she realized that the Volkov soldiers were already in position for an abduction that would destroy everything she'd learned to love, Sophia understood that some problems could only be solved with superior firepower and the willingness to use it. The school pickup went exactly as Vincent had planned, right up until it didn't. Sophia collected Luca with her usual maternal efficiency, helping him with his backpack and listening to his excited chatter about the dragon book his teacher had recommended. To any observer, she was simply another guardian retrieving another child, unremarkable in her casual clothing and patient demeanour. But concealed beneath her jacket was a Sig Sauer P229 with 2 spare magazines. Strapped to her ankle was a ceramic knife that wouldn't register on metal detectors, and programmed into her phone were the emergency codes that would bring Matteo's entire security apparatus down on anyone stupid enough to threaten his son. "Fia, can we stop for ice cream?" Luca asked as they walked toward the school parking lot. "Mrs. Chen packed healthy snacks, but I've been thinking about chocolate chip cookie dough all day." "Maybe on the way home," Sophia replied, scanning the surrounding area with tactical awareness that catalogued every potential threat, every possible escape route, every civilian who would need protecting if violence erupted in a place where violence should never exist. The black SUV was still there. The construction workers in hard hats were still pretending to work while maintaining sight lines on the parking lot. Vincent's betrayal was unfolding with the precision of a military operation, and Sophia felt the familiar calm that descended when preparation met execution. She loaded Luca into his car seat with extra care, checking the straps twice and ensuring his seatbelt was positioned correctly. If things went wrong, she needed him secured and protected. If things went right, she needed him ready to move fast when she gave the signal. "Fia!" Luca's voice was small, suddenly worried. "Why do you look scared?" Sophia met his eyes in the rearview mirror, seeing too much intelligence in that 8-year-old face, too much awareness of the adult world's dangers. "I'm not scared, sweetheart. I'm just being extra careful today. Like when we play the whisper game." "Exactly like that," Sophia confirmed, starting the engine and pulling out of the parking space with deliberate casualness. Sometimes being careful means being very, very quiet. The black SUV followed them at a professional distance, maintaining the kind of surveillance that looked routine to civilians, but screamed hostile intent to anyone with tactical training. Sophia drove the route Vincent had suggested, appearing to follow his instructions while actually leading the hunters into the trap she'd spent 18 hours preparing. The construction zone was exactly where Vincent had promised it would be. 3 blocks of torn-up asphalt and concrete barriers that channeled traffic into a single lane. Perfect for an ambush. No escape routes, no witnesses, no way for a civilian vehicle to maneuver away from attackers who knew the terrain and had positioned themselves accordingly. Sophia drove into the kill zone at exactly the speed Vincent would expect, her hands steady on the steering wheel despite the adrenaline coursing through her system like liquid lightning. The attack came from 3 directions simultaneously. The black SUV accelerated, moving to block their escape route from behind. 2 more vehicles emerged from side streets, boxing them in with the professional coordination of operators who had run this play before. The construction workers dropped their equipment and produced automatic weapons, their hard hats suddenly looking like military helmets, their work clothes revealing body armour underneath. 6 men, professional-grade equipment, overlapping fields of fire, contingency plans for resistance. They had planned for everything except Sophia Moreau. She hit the brakes and spun the wheel hard left, using a combat driving technique that sent their car into a controlled skid that carried them behind a concrete barrier just as the first bullets shattered their rear window. Luca screamed, the sound cutting through Sophia's tactical focus like a blade, but she couldn't comfort him yet. First, she had to ensure he would live long enough for comfort to matter. "Stay down, baby," she shouted over the gunfire. "Cover your ears and stay down." Sophia rolled out of the driver's seat, drawing her weapon in the same fluid motion, muscle memory taking over from conscious thought. 8 years of combat training condensed into pure instinct. She put 3 rounds through the windshield of the nearest vehicle, watching the driver slump forward as his foot hit the accelerator and sent the car careening into a concrete barrier. 5 targets remaining. The Volkov soldiers were good, but they weren't expecting opposition from someone with her skill set. They had planned for a civilian chauffeur who would panic and surrender when faced with overwhelming force. They hadn't planned for a Special Forces veteran who had learned urban warfare in places where mistakes meant death and second chances were myths. Sophia used the concrete barriers as cover, moving with tactical precision while the enemy tried to establish fire superiority through volume rather than accuracy. She picked them off one by one, a shot through the gap in someone's body armour, a headshot for the sniper who thought his elevated position made him untouchable, a double-tap centre mass for the operator who made the mistake of trying to flank her position. The battle lasted 97 seconds. When the gunfire stopped, 6 men lay dead in a construction zone that would never be the same. Sophia's ears were ringing from the enclosed space acoustics. Her hands were steady, but her heart was hammering against her ribs, and she could hear Luca crying in the back seat of their bullet-riddled car. But they were alive. Sophia holstered her weapon and returned to the car, her movements sharp and efficient despite the emotional earthquake happening behind her ribs. Luca was curled in his car seat, hands over his ears, tears streaming down his face as he sobbed with the particular terror of a child who had just discovered that the adult world was more dangerous than even he had imagined. "It's okay, sweetheart," Sophia whispered, unbuckling his seatbelt and gathering him into her arms. "It's over. You're safe. I've got you." "The bad men," Luca hiccuped against her shoulder. "They had guns. They were shooting at us." "Yes, they were, but they can't hurt us anymore." Sophia carried him away from the carnage, moving toward the police sirens that were already approaching the scene. "Remember what we practiced about being brave when scary things happen?" Luca nodded, his small body still shaking but his tears slowing as he processed that he was alive, he was safe, he was protected by someone who had kept her promise about always keeping him safe. "You were so brave," Sophia told him, and meant it. "So very, very brave. Your papa is going to be so proud of you." "Will you tell him how brave I was?" Luca asked, his voice muffled against her neck. "I'll tell him everything," Sophia promised, "including how you trusted me to keep you safe, even when it was scary." "I always trust you, Fia," Luca said, with the simple conviction that made Sophia's chest ache with love and terror, and the fierce protectiveness that had transformed her from a broken veteran into something approximating a guardian angel. Over Luca's shoulder, Sophia saw Vincent Caruso's car approaching the scene, his expression carefully arranged in a mask of shock and concern that didn't reach his eyes. He was playing his role perfectly, the trusted security chief, arriving to assess the damage and ensure the family's protection. But Sophia saw what others wouldn't notice, the slight relaxation in his posture when he spotted the bodies, the quick calculation as he assessed whether his backup plan was still viable, the moment of frustrated rage when he realized that his carefully orchestrated kidnapping had become a massacre that left him exposed and vulnerable. Their eyes met across the crime scene, and Sophia saw Vincent's expression shift from manufactured concern to genuine fear as he understood that she knew everything, that she had always known everything. that Vincent Caruso's war against the Santangelo family was about to become very personal, very fast, and very deadly. Sophia smiled at him with the cold precision of someone who had just added 6 more ghosts to her collection and was prepared to make it 7 if necessary. Vincent Caruso had made a catastrophic miscalculation. He had assumed that eliminating the father would leave the son vulnerable and unprotected. He hadn't planned for the possibility that someone might love that son enough to become his sword and shield simultaneously. Someone who had survived 8 years of war and 3 years of survivor's guilt and was finally ready to stop surviving and start living. Someone who had nothing left to lose except the family she'd chosen to protect. And that, as Vincent was about to discover, made her the most dangerous person in his rapidly shrinking world. 6 months later, on a Christmas morning that sparkled with new snow and old promises kept, Sophia Santangelo descended the main staircase of her home like a queen returning to her rightful throne. The woman who had once counted tips in restaurant bathrooms was gone completely, replaced by someone who moved with lethal grace in a dress that cost more than most people's cars. The diamond on her left hand caught the morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, throwing rainbows across marble floors that had been polished to mirror perfection by staff who called her Mrs. Santangelo with genuine respect rather than hired deference. But it was her eyes that told the real story of transformation. No longer the carefully blank expression of someone hiding from the world's attention, but the confident gaze of a woman who had found her place in the universe and was prepared to defend it against anyone foolish enough to challenge her claim. "Mama Fia, Papa said we have to wait for you before we open presents." Luca's voice carried across the marble foyer with the joyful impatience of a child who had learned that Christmas morning was safe, that family traditions would be honoured, that the adults who loved him would always be there to share his happiness. He was taller now, his 8-year-old frame stretching toward the 9-year-old he would become next spring. The selective mutism was a memory, replaced by the constant chatter of a boy who felt secure enough to fill any silence with observations about dragons, questions about homework, and detailed analyses of why chocolate chip cookies were scientifically superior to oatmeal raisin. Sophia reached the bottom of the staircase and opened her arms, catching Luca as he launched himself into her embrace with the uninhibited enthusiasm of someone who had never doubted that she would catch him. The hug smelled like strawberry shampoo and Christmas morning and the particular sweetness of a child who knew he was loved unconditionally. "Merry Christmas, my brave boy," Sophia murmured against his hair, using the endearment that had become automatic between them. He was brave now, in ways that 8-year-old boys shouldn't need to be brave, but brave nonetheless. "Merry Christmas, Mamma," Luca replied, the word rolling off his tongue with the natural ease of someone who had never questioned her right to the title. "I drew you a special picture. It's under the tree with your other presents." Sophia's heart clenched with the sweet pain that came from loving someone so completely that their happiness became more important than your own survival. "I can't wait to see it." She looked up to find Matteo watching from the archway that led to the family room, his expression soft with the contentment of a man who had everything he'd never dared hope for. He was wearing a cashmere sweater instead of his usual tactical clothing, his dark hair showing threads of silver that somehow made him look more distinguished rather than older. The stress lines around his eyes had softened over the past 6 months, replaced by laugh lines earned through bedtime story negotiations and Saturday morning pancake battles. But it was the wedding ring on his left hand that made Sophia's pulse quicken with possibilities they had stopped being afraid to name. White gold, simple and elegant, matching the set they had exchanged 3 months ago in a ceremony that had been equal parts fairy tale and armed fortress. Because even fairy tales needed security details when the princess was a former special forces operator and the prince ran an organisation that required bulletproof glass in the family car. "Mrs. Chen outdid herself with breakfast," Matteo said, moving closer with the predatory grace that had never quite left him, even in domestic moments. but she's threatening to feed it to the staff if we don't appear in the dining room within the next 10 minutes. Mrs. Chen's threats are legendary, Sophia agreed solemnly. The housekeeper had become more than an employee over the past 6 months. She was the grandmother figure who spoiled Luca with homemade cookies and traditional Chinese remedies, the maternal presence who had taught Sophia the difference between managing a household and creating a home. They made their way to the family room, where a Christmas tree that belonged in a magazine spread dominated one corner with carefully arranged presents beneath branches that sparkled with lights and ornaments collected over decades of Sant'Angelo family celebrations. But it was the newest addition to the collection that caught Sophia's attention. A simple ornament made from construction paper and glitter, obviously crafted by small hands with more enthusiasm than artistic skill. Luca made that one himself, Matteo said quietly, following her gaze. He insisted it had to go on the front of the tree where everyone could see it. Sophia moved closer to examine Luca's creation and felt her breath catch when she realized what she was looking at. 3 figures cut from coloured paper and decorated with glitter that would probably be finding in carpet fibres until next Christmas. A tall man in a dark suit, a small boy with brown hair, and a woman in white. They were holding hands and standing under what appeared to be a yellow sun with rays extending in all directions. The same family portrait he had drawn for her that night at Romano's, when she had been a waitress protecting a stranger's child and he had been a boy looking for someone safe to trust. He said it was us, Matteo continued, his voice carrying the particular emotion that came from watching dreams crystallize into reality. Our family, the way it's supposed to be. Sophia reached up to touch the ornament with gentle fingers, remembering the moment when everything had changed, when she had stepped between Derek Walsh and this boy, choosing protection over invisibility, choosing to matter instead of choosing to hide. "It is the way it's supposed to be," she said softly. The morning unfolded with the comfortable chaos of family traditions observed and new memories created. Presents were opened with appropriate excitement and gratitude. Mrs. Chen's legendary Christmas breakfast was consumed with the reverence it deserved. Luca entertained them with detailed explanations of his latest Lego construction project, which appeared to be a dragon-proof castle with suspiciously accurate defensive fortifications. But it was during the quiet moment after lunch, when Luca was napping off his sugar-induced coma and the household staff was taking their own Christmas break, that Sophia found herself thinking about the woman she used to be. She was standing in the kitchen, the same kitchen where she had first understood that her feelings for Matteo had moved beyond professional gratitude into dangerous territory, when he appeared behind her with the silent approach that had probably saved his life more times than she wanted to calculate. "Regrets?" he asked quietly, his hands settling on her shoulders with the casual possessiveness of someone who had earned the right to touch her. Sophia leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat through the expensive cashmere. "About which part? The marriage? The adoption? The fact that I haven't served coffee to strangers in 6 months?" "About any of it. All of it." Matteo's voice carried genuine concern, the worry of someone who understood that happiness could be as difficult to adjust to as trauma. "This isn't the life you planned for yourself." Sophia turned in his arms, meeting his dark eyes with the confidence of someone who had found exactly where she belonged. "I never planned for myself, period. I planned for missions, for objectives, for keeping other people alive. I never planned for this." She gestured around the kitchen, encompassing the marble counters and professional appliances and the refrigerator covered with Luca's artwork. "I never planned for a home, for a family, for someone who loves me enough to give me both." "And now?" Matteo asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. "Now I understand what I was fighting for all along," Sophia replied, reaching up to touch his face with fingers that wore his ring and bore the calluses of someone who still practiced her combat skills every morning in the compound's private gym. "I was fighting to get here, to this kitchen with this man, protecting this boy who calls me Mama and draws pictures of our family for the Christmas tree." Matteo's smile was soft and genuine, the expression of a man who had stopped expecting miracles and started living inside one. The waitress is gone then? Sophia thought of the woman who had served coffee and deflected casual cruelty, who had made herself invisible to survive in a world that had no use for broken soldiers. That woman had been necessary, had served her purpose, had kept Sophia alive long enough to find her way here. But she had never been the whole story. The waitress was never really there, Sophia said finally. She was just the disguise I wore until I found someone worth taking it off for. From the family room came the sound of Luca stirring from his nap, his sleepy voice calling for his parents with the confidence of someone who knew they would always answer. Sophia and Matteo exchanged a look that carried 6 months of shared mornings and whispered conversations, and the particular intimacy that came from building a life together, one careful decision at a time. The Queen, however, Sophia said, moving toward Luca's voice with the maternal urgency that had become automatic, she's here to stay. And as Sophia Santangelo went to collect her son for an afternoon of Christmas games and family traditions, she understood finally and completely that some transformations were permanent. The invisible woman was gone forever. Long live the Queen. The next evening, Sophia was wiping down table 12 when the temperature in Romano's dropped 10 degrees without warning. She looked up from the red checkered tablecloth to see the man from the corner booth walking through the front door, but this time he wasn't alone. A small boy with dark hair and enormous brown eyes clung to his hand, moving with the careful precision of a child who had learned that sudden movements could shatter the fragile peace adults tried to maintain. The boy was maybe 8 years old, wearing a navy blue sweater that probably cost more than Sophia's monthly rent. His small fingers gripped his father's hand like a lifeline, and when the hostess approached with menus and her practiced smile, he stepped behind the man's legs, seeking shelter in expensive fabric and familiar protection. "Good evening, Mr. Santangelo," the hostess said, her voice carrying the particular deference reserved for customers who tipped in hundreds rather than singles. "Your usual table?" "Matteo Santangelo." Sophia filed the name away with the automatic precision that had kept her alive through 8 years of military service and 3 years of civilian invisibility. "Please, Maria," he replied, his accent more pronounced when addressing the elderly Italian hostess. "And perhaps some crayons for Luca tonight. He's been drawing again." The boy, Luca, peered around his father's legs to offer Maria a shy smile that transformed his solemn face into something heartbreakingly beautiful. Maria's entire demeanour softened, and she reached into her apron to produce a small box of crayons she kept specifically for the rare child who wandered into their adult-oriented establishment. "Of course, baby," she cooed in heavily accented English. "You sit by the window, yes? You can watch the cars and make pictures for Nonna Maria." Sophia watched this exchange from across the dining room, noting how the child's shoulders relaxed when Maria spoke to him, how he nodded eagerly at the mention of drawing, how his grip on his father's hand loosened just slightly. She also noticed how Matteo's eyes swept the restaurant with military efficiency, cataloguing faces, exits, and potential threats before he allowed himself to focus on his son's happiness. They were seated at table 9, the corner booth by the large window that offered clear sight lines to both the street and the restaurant's interior. Strategic positioning disguised as a father indulging his child's preference for watching traffic. Sophia had served hundreds of families over the years, but something about this pair made her chest tighten with recognition she couldn't name. The boy's careful movements, his father's hypervigilance, the way they sat so close together in the large booth as if the empty space itself posed a threat. She'd seen this dynamic before, in military families where deployment had carved hollows that civilian life couldn't quite fill. She approached their table with coffee for Matteo and a children's menu for Luca, though she suspected the boy was already familiar with Romano's offerings. "Good evening," she said, her voice automatically adjusting to the gentle tone she used with children and wounded soldiers. "Can I start you with something to drink?" Luca looked up at her with those enormous eyes and whispered, "Hot chocolate, please, with extra marshmallows." His voice was barely audible, but Sophia heard it clearly. She also heard what wasn't there. No excitement, no childish demands, just a polite request delivered with the careful precision of someone much older than his years. Extra marshmallows coming right up," Sophia replied, crouching down slightly to meet his eye level. "Do you like the big ones or the little ones?" "Little ones," Luca said, and this time his voice carried the faintest hint of actual preference rather than learned politeness. "They melt better." "Smart choice," Sophia said solemnly. "I always thought the little ones were superior, but not many people understand advanced marshmallow theory." For the first time, Luca smiled. A real smile, not the careful expression children learned to wear when adults were watching. Sophia felt something crack open in her chest, some fortress wall she'd built around the part of her heart that remembered holding her baby brother, teaching her commander's kids to tie their shoes, being the safe adult in a world full of dangerous ones. She stood up to find Matteo watching this exchange with an expression she couldn't quite read. Surprise, maybe, or recognition of his own. "Coffee, black," he said when she met his eyes, "and thank you for talking to him. He doesn't speak to many people." "He's got good instincts," Sophia replied, meaning it. "Kids usually know who's safe." Something flickered across Matteo's face at those words, but before Sophia could analyse it, Luca had pulled out his box of crayons and was already beginning to sketch on the paper placemat. She left them to study their menus and returned to the kitchen to prepare Luca's hot chocolate with the kind of care usually reserved for much more expensive orders. When she returned, Luca was deep in concentration, his small tongue poking out slightly as he worked on what appeared to be a very detailed drawing of a car. Matteo was watching his son with the expression of a man who had learned to find miracles in ordinary moments. "What kind of car is that?" Sophia asked as she set down the hot chocolate, extra marshmallows floating like tiny clouds in the rich brown liquid. "Lamborghini Huracan," Luca said without looking up. "Papa has one, but we don't drive it very much because it's too loud for the city." Sophia glanced at Matteo, who was studying her reaction with that same intense focus she'd noticed the night before. "That's a very fast car," she said to Luca. "Do you like fast cars?" "I like safe cars better," Luca replied, his crayon never stopping. "Papa's other car has special glass so nobody can hurt us." The words were delivered with the matter-of-fact tone children used when discussing their reality, but Sophia felt them like a physical blow. This boy lived in a world where bulletproof glass was a practical necessity, where his father's choice of vehicle was dictated by threat assessment rather than preference. She'd served families like this before, though she'd never consciously acknowledged it. Men in expensive suits who paid cash, who positioned themselves with clear views of exits, who spoke in languages she recognised but didn't understand. Women who wore designer clothing like armour and jewellery that could fund small countries. Children who were polite and quiet and never quite seemed to be children. "Safety is important," Sophia agreed, and meant it. "Your papa is smart to keep you safe." Matteo's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. When Sophia met his eyes, she saw something that looked almost like gratitude. Over the next hour, she watched their ritual unfold. Matteo ordered for both of them, osso buco for himself, chicken parmigiana for Luca, extra bread because growing boys needed carbohydrates. Luca drew 3 more pictures, a house with too many windows, a dog that looked suspiciously like a German shepherd, and something that might have been a woman in a white dress. When Sophia brought their entrees, Luca held up the drawing of the woman. "This is for you," he said shyly, "because you were nice about my car." Sophia accepted the drawing with the solemnity it deserved. The woman in the white dress had dark hair and a smile, and she was standing in front of what looked like Romano's distinctive red awning. "It's beautiful," Sophia said, and meant it. "May I keep it?" Luca nodded eagerly, and Sophia tucked the drawing carefully into her apron pocket, next to her order pad and the perpetually dead cell phone she couldn't afford to replace. As they ate, she noticed other things. How Matteo cut Luca's chicken into precisely sized pieces without being asked, How Luca automatically saved the last bite of his bread for his father, a gesture of sharing so natural it had clearly been practiced countless times. How they both relaxed incrementally as the meal progressed, the careful tension in their shoulders easing as the familiar rhythm of their weekly dinner tradition worked its quiet magic. When Matteo's phone buzzed during dessert, Sophia saw him check the caller ID and decline the call without hesitation. Luca noticed too, glancing up from his tiramisu with something that might have been concern. "Business can wait," Matteo told his son gently. "Thursday night is our time." Sophia was refilling water glasses 3 tables away when she heard Luca's voice, still quiet but carrying clearly in the evening lull. "Papa, do you think the nice lady likes working here?" "I don't know, Figlio. Why do you ask?" "She looks sad sometimes, like Mama used to look when you had to travel." Sophia's hand tightened on the water pitcher. She hadn't realised her mask was slipping, that her carefully maintained professional composure was transparent to an 8-year-old boy who had learned to read adult emotions as a survival skill. "Some people carry sadness even when they smile," Matteo replied, his voice gentle but tinged with something that sounded like personal experience. "It doesn't mean they're not good people." "Maybe she needs someone to take care of her too," Luca said matter-of-factly, "like we take care of each other." From across the dining room, Sophia felt Matteo's eyes find her. When she looked up from the water pitcher, he was watching her with an expression that made her feel exposed, as if he could see through the professional server's mask to the exhausted veteran beneath, the woman who worked 3 jobs and still couldn't save her mother, the daughter who counted tips in the bathroom and cried where nobody could see. For the second night in a row, Sophia Moreau felt truly seen. And for the second night in a row, she understood that being seen by Matteo Sant'Angelo was going to change everything. 3 weeks later, on a Friday night that should have been routine, Sophia was working alone. Marcus had called in sick again, which everyone knew meant hungover, and Jessica had quit via text message that morning, after Romano decided her request for a 25-cent raise was unreasonable in the current economic climate. So Sophia was covering the entire dining room by herself, moving between tables with the mechanical precision of someone who had learned to function on 4 hours of sleep and spite. The dinner rush was in full swing, every table occupied, the kitchen backed up, and the air thick with competing conversations in 3 languages. Sophia balanced orders and complaints with equal grace, her smile never wavering, even as sweat beaded along her hairline, and her feet screamed inside shoes held together with duct tape and determination. She was refilling bread baskets when he walked in. Derek Walsh announced himself before he cleared the door, his voice carrying across the restaurant with the particular arrogance of someone who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. He was maybe 45, soft around the middle in the way that expensive suits tried to hide, with the ruddy complexion of a man who had discovered that alcohol was an acceptable substitute for genuine personality. "This better be good," he announced to no one in particular, loosening his tie with the aggressive casualness of someone performing wealth rather than living it. "I could have gone to Maria, but my business partner insisted on authentic." Sophia noted the expensive watch, the designer shoes, the way his eyes swept the restaurant with obvious disappointment. Another finance type slumming it for the story he'd tell at the country club. She'd served dozens like him over the years, men who ordered the most expensive wine on the menu and sent it back for being too pedestrian, who snapped their fingers for service and left 10% tips while complaining about the decline of work ethic. Maria seated him at table 14, the two-top by the window that offered a clear view of the street, and unfortunately most of the other diners. Sophia watched Derek's expression sour as he processed his surroundings. The plastic grapevines, the checkered tablecloths, the family of 4 at table 6 whose children were actually behaving like children instead of miniature adults. Sophia approached with water and a menu, her server's mask locked in place. "Good evening, sir. Can I start you with something to drink?" Derek looked her up and down with the calculating assessment of someone appraising livestock. Whiskey, top shelf, and make it a double. I have a feeling I'm going to need it in this place. Of course. Any particular brand preference? Whatever's most expensive. I'm not here to drink well liquor like these people. He gestured dismissively at the other diners, his voice carrying clearly to nearby tables. Several heads turned, expressions ranging from curiosity to offence. Sophia felt the familiar tightness in her shoulders that preceded trouble. In the military, they'd called it threat assessment. In civilian service, it was just pattern recognition. Men like Derek Walsh were walking storms, and the weather was about to turn bad. She brought him his whiskey, 18-year-old Macallan that Romano kept locked behind the bar for special occasions, or customers who paid special prices. Derek knocked back half of it in one swallow and immediately signalled for another. "Food," he announced when she returned with the refill. "Whatever's good here, though I'm not holding my breath." Sophia recommended the osso buco, the house specialty that had earned Romano's its modest reputation. Derek waved her away without listening to the description. "Fine, whatever, just make it fast. I have actual important things to do tonight." Over the next hour, Derek's volume increased in direct proportion to his alcohol consumption. He complained about the bread being too crusty, the wine selection being limited, the music being ethnic. He made phone calls at the table, discussing business deals with the aggressive confidence of someone who believed everyone wanted to hear about his success. Sophia served his entree with professional courtesy, refilled his wineglass, and tried to minimise his impact on the other diners. But Derek Walsh was not a man who believed in minimising anything about himself. "Excuse me, sweetheart," he called out when Sophia was 3 tables away, snapping his fingers like she was a dog who'd forgotten her training. "This osso buco is overcooked. I want something else." Sophia approached calmly, noting that he'd eaten more than half the portion. "I'm sorry you're not satisfied, sir. What would you prefer instead?" Something that wasn't prepared by someone who learned cooking from their grandmother in the old country. "This is America, sweetheart. We have standards here." The insult hit the dining room like a physical blow. Conversations paused. The elderly Italian couple at table 12 looked up from their anniversary dinner with expressions of hurt and confusion. Maria, the hostess who had immigrated from Sicily 40 years ago and still sent money home to her grandchildren, actually took a step backward. Sophia felt something cold and dangerous unfurl in her chest. "Sir, I'd be happy to have the kitchen prepare something else for you, but I need to ask that you keep your voice down. Other guests are trying to enjoy their evening." Derek's face flushed red above his collar. "Are you telling me what I can and can't say? Do you know who I am? I know you're a guest in this restaurant, and I know that other guests deserve the same courtesy and respect that you do." "Courtesy?" Derek laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "From the help? That's rich. You want courtesy, sweetheart? Try working somewhere that matters instead of this immigrant dive." Sophia's hands remained steady, but her voice dropped to the tone she'd used with hostile insurgents and drunken soldiers looking for a fight. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time to lower your voice. If you can't do that, I'll need to ask you to settle your bill and leave." Derek stood up, swaying slightly, his bulk casting a shadow across their table. "You think you can throw me out? I spend more on lunch than this dump makes in a week. I could buy this place and turn it into a parking lot." He was loud enough now that every conversation in the restaurant had stopped. Children were staring. The elderly couple looked frightened. The businessman in the corner had his phone out, either to call for help or record whatever was about to happen. Sophia positioned herself between Derek and the other diners, her body language calm but alert. Military training whispered tactics. Assess the threat, control the space, protect civilians, de-escalate if possible. "I understand you're frustrated, sir, but—" "Frustrated?" Derek's voice cracked like a whip. "I'm insulted. Insulted that I have to eat in the same room as these people. Insulted that some waitress thinks she can tell me how to behave. Insulted that—" He stopped mid-sentence, his attention caught by something behind Sophia. She turned to see Matteo Sant'Angelo walking through the front door, Luca's small hand clasped firmly in his own. They were precisely on time for their weekly dinner, but tonight they were walking into a war zone instead of their peaceful sanctuary. Luca took one look at Derek, red-faced, gesturing wildly, voice raised in anger, and immediately pressed himself against his father's leg, his small face going pale. Sophia saw the exact moment when Derek's shouting connected to whatever trauma lived behind those enormous brown eyes, saw the child's careful composure crumble into the terror of a boy who had learned that angry adults meant danger. And in that moment, Sophia Moreau understood that the storm was about to become a hurricane. Derek followed her gaze, spotted Matteo's expensive suit and confident bearing, and made the worst decision of his rapidly deteriorating evening. "Well, well," he said, his voice carrying across the silent restaurant like a challenge. "Look what we have here. More customers with more money than taste." The temperature in Romano's family restaurant dropped 20 degrees, and everyone except Derek Walsh seemed to feel it. Derek Walsh had spent 43 years believing that money could buy him immunity from consequences. He was about to learn otherwise. Maria seated Matteo and Luca at their usual table with trembling hands, her whispered apologies in rapid Italian barely audible over the tension that had settled over the dining room like fog. Other guests were gathering their belongings, leaving cash on tables, creating distance between themselves and whatever was about to unfold. The smart ones recognized predators when they saw them. The smarter ones recognized when two predators were about to meet. Sophia watched Luca slide into the booth, his small body pressed against the window as if he could disappear into the glass. His drawings from previous weeks were still tucked in her apron pocket, but tonight there would be no crayons, no gentle conversation about cars and marshmallows. Tonight her boy was scared. Her boy. The thought came unbidden and settled in her chest like a physical weight. When had she started thinking of Luca Santangelo as hers to protect? Derek, emboldened by whiskey and his own inflated sense of importance, took Matteo's silence as invitation rather than warning. He stumbled away from his table, navigating between chairs with the careful precision of someone who knew he was drunk but believed he was still functional. "Hey there, friend," Derek called out, his voice carrying the false bonhomie of someone performing friendliness rather than feeling it. "Nice suit. What line of work are you in?" Matteo looked up from the menu he'd been studying with his son, his dark eyes meeting Derek's with the flat calm of someone who had measured threats, and found this one wanting. "I'm here for dinner with my boy, nothing more." His accent was more pronounced tonight, Sophia noticed. Not nervous. Matteo Santangelo didn't do nervous, but controlled. Deliberately controlled. "Dinner, right?" Derek's laugh was too loud for the space, too sharp for the silence. "In a place like this? Come on, man. Someone with your aesthetic could afford better. Much better." Luca's small hand reached across the table to touch his father's arm, a gesture so subtle Sophia almost missed it. But she caught the way Matteo's jaw tightened, the way his fingers curled slightly around his son's. "My son enjoys it here," Matteo said quietly. "The food is good, the service is excellent, we have no complaints." "The service?" Derek turned to leer at Sophia, who had positioned herself strategically between his table and theirs. "Yeah, I bet you appreciate the personal attention and from the help." The words hung in the air like a physical slap. Sophia felt heat flood her face, not from embarrassment but from rage so pure it made her teeth ache. In the military, they'd called it combat fury, the cold, crystalline anger that preceded violence. But before she could respond, Matteo was standing. He didn't unfold from the booth so much as rise from it, his movement fluid and predatory. He was taller than Derek by 4 inches and broader by the kind of muscle that came from necessity rather than gymnasium membership. When he spoke, his voice was silk wrapped around steel. "I think you've had enough to drink tonight." Derek, too drunk to read the warning signs that had every other person in the restaurant backing toward exits, stepped closer. "Are you threatening me, friend? Because I don't think you know who you're dealing with." "No," Matteo said with terrifying calm. "I don't think you know who you're dealing with." Derek's response was to laugh, a sound like breaking bottles, and pivot toward the easiest target in the room. "What's wrong with the kid?" he demanded, gesturing toward Luca with the aggressive carelessness of someone who had never learned that children were not props for adult entertainment. "Why's he so quiet? Why's he hiding like that?" Luca flinched as if he'd been struck, pressing himself further into the corner of the booth. His breathing had gone quick and shallow, the hyperventilation Sophia recognized from her own nightmares, and the combat veterans she'd served with who carried invisible wounds. "You need to step away from my son." Matteo's voice had dropped to a register that raised every primitive alarm in Sophia's nervous system. This was the voice that preceded violence. This was the voice that gave orders to men who killed for a living. But Derek Walsh was too drunk on whiskey and his own importance to hear death when it introduced itself. "Step away from some mute kid in an overpriced sweater." Derek's voice cracked like a whip across the silent restaurant. "What's wrong with him anyway? Brain damage? Is that why he can't talk like a normal kid?" The words hit Luca like physical blows. He made a sound, not quite a sob, not quite a whimper, and pressed his hands over his ears, rocking slightly in the booth. Sophia saw tears tracking down his cheeks, saw the way his small body curled in on itself as if he could make himself small enough to disappear from Derek's attention. And in that moment, something fundamental shifted in Sophia Moreau's universe. She had spent 3 years perfecting the art of invisibility, of keeping her head down and her mouth shut, of surviving rather than living. She had learned to count tips instead of taking stands, to swallow insults instead of serving justice, to be professional instead of protective. But watching Derek Walsh terrorize an 8-year-old boy who had already survived more trauma than most adults would face in a lifetime, Sophia rediscovered something she thought she'd buried with her military uniform. She remembered what it felt like to be a warrior. Derek, sensing vulnerability and feeding on it like the predator he was, reached out toward Luca with one fat finger, intending to poke the crying child like he was some kind of circus attraction. "Come on, kid, use your words. What's the matter? Cat got your—" Sophia moved like lightning. One moment she was standing 3 feet away with a coffee pot in her hands. The next moment she was between Derek and Luca, her body forming a wall of protection that no amount of money or bluster could breach. The coffee pot clattered to the floor, hot liquid spreading across checkered linoleum, but Sophia didn't hear it hit. She only heard the silence that followed her action, heavy, suffocating silence that pressed against everyone in the restaurant like a physical weight. Derek's finger stopped inches from Sophia's chest, his forward momentum arrested by the sudden appearance of an obstacle he hadn't expected. He looked down at her with the confused expression of someone whose world had just rearranged itself in ways he couldn't process. "Excuse me," he said, his voice thick with alcohol and indignation. "You're in my way." Sophia looked up at him with eyes that had seen combat in 3 different countries, had watched friends die and enemies surrender, had learned that sometimes the only thing standing between innocent people and monsters was the willingness to become something monstrous in return. "Sir," she said, her voice carrying the deadly calm that had earned her commendations and promotions and the respect of soldiers who followed her into fire, "you need to step away from the child, now." Derek's face flushed red above his collar. Behind Sophia, she could feel rather than see Matteo Santangelo watching this exchange with the focused attention of someone reassessing everything he thought he knew about the woman who served his coffee, and remembered his son's preference for extra marshmallows. "You think you can tell me what to do?" Derek's voice was rising again, drawing attention from the few remaining diners who hadn't found reasons to leave. "You're nobody. You're the help. You don't get to—" He raised his hand towards Sophia. Whether to push her aside or strike her she would never know, because her body had already shifted into combat stance without conscious thought. weight balanced, centre of gravity lowered, hands positioned to block or counter or simply break whatever part of him came within reach. Derek Walsh had spent his entire adult life believing that intimidation was a function of wealth, that authority came from expensive suits and louder voices, and the ability to make other people's lives difficult. He had never encountered anyone who understood that real power, the kind that mattered when everything else fell away, came from the simple willingness to stand between a monster and a child, regardless of the cost. And as Sophia Moreau stared up at him with the absolute calm of someone who had chosen her ground and would hold it no matter what, Derek Walsh finally understood that he had made a catastrophic miscalculation. The reckoning he had spent 43 years avoiding was about to begin. Derek's hand moved towards Sophia like a sledgehammer toward glass. She caught his wrist mid-swing with the kind of precision that came from 8 years of hand-to-hand combat training and 3 years of suppressed muscle memory finally finding release. Her fingers found the pressure point between his radius and ulna, applied exactly 17 pounds of force, and watched his face go white as his nervous system registered pain it had never experienced. "I said step away," Sophia repeated, her voice carrying the deadly calm of someone who had given orders to soldiers in firefights and expected them to be followed without question. "This is your final warning." Derek tried to jerk his hand free, his alcohol-clouded mind still believing that size and aggression would overcome technique and training. Sophia used his momentum against him, a simple Aikido redirect that sent him stumbling backward into an empty chair. The crash echoed through the silent restaurant like a gunshot. The few remaining diners scrambled for the exits. Maria crossed herself and began whispering prayers in rapid Italian. The busboy, who had been clearing tables near the kitchen doorway, stood frozen with a tub of dirty dishes, his eyes wide as he watched a woman half Derek's size handle him like he was made of paper. But Sophia's attention wasn't on the fleeing customers or the stammering drunk. Her focus was laser-sharp on the booth behind her, where she could hear Luca's breathing gradually slowing from panicked hyperventilation to something approaching normal, where she could feel Matteo Sant'Angelo's presence, like heat from a forge, watching her with the kind of attention that missed nothing and forgot less. Derek hauled himself upright, his face red with embarrassment and rage. "You psychotic bitch," he snarled, cradling his wrist against his chest. "I'm going to have you arrested. I'm going to sue this dump into the ground. I'm going to—" "You're going to leave," Sophia interrupted, her stance remaining loose and ready. Professional. "You're going to walk out that door, get in your car, and drive away, and you're never going to come back here." "Like hell I am." Derek reached for his phone with his uninjured hand, his movements clumsy with alcohol and adrenaline. "I'm calling the police. I'm calling my lawyer. You have no idea who you're messing with, you little—" Sophia rattled off his license plate number like she was reading it from a teleprompter. "BMW 7 Series, black New York plates, hotel key card in your jacket pocket from the Marriott downtown, room 847. Wedding ring tan line on your left hand, but no ring tonight, which means you told your wife you were working late again." Derek's phone stopped halfway to his ear. "How did you—" "Your business card fell out of your wallet when you paid for the first round." Sophia lied smoothly. "Derek Walsh, Senior Vice President, Cromwell Investment Management. Your company's ethics hotline is prominently displayed on their website. I'm sure they'd love to hear about how their senior VP spent his Friday night terrorizing children in family restaurants." It wasn't true. She'd learned his name and details through pure observation and deduction. But Derek's alcohol-fogged brain couldn't process the impossibility fast enough to call her bluff. "You drove here," Sophia continued relentlessly. "Blood alcohol level probably twice the legal limit. Your wife Sarah thinks you're at a client dinner. I heard you take the call when you ducked out for a smoke 20 minutes ago. Should I call her? Should I call the police? Should I call your boss and explain why their company might be facing a very public scandal?" Derek's face cycled through confusion, fear, and calculation. Sophia could see the moment his cost-benefit analysis reached its inevitable conclusion. Whatever satisfaction he might get from pressing this confrontation wasn't worth the potential destruction of the life he'd spent decades building. "This isn't over," he muttered, but the fight had gone out of him completely. He was already reaching for his wallet, throwing cash on his abandoned table with the desperate haste of someone who had finally realized he was outmatched. "Yes," Sophia said with absolute finality. "It is." Derek stumbled toward the door, pausing only to deliver a parting shot over his shoulder. "You think you're so smart? You think you've won something here? You're still nobody, still the help, still invisible." The words were meant to wound, but they bounced off Sophia like rain off armour, because for the first time in 3 years she didn't feel invisible at all. She felt exactly the opposite. She felt seen. The door chimed as Derek disappeared into the night, and the silence that followed was different from the tension that had preceded his exit. This was the quiet of aftermath, of crisis survived and normalcy slowly reasserting itself. Sophia turned around to find Luca peeking over the edge of the booth. His tears dried, but his eyes still wide with lingering fear. When he saw her looking at him, he whispered the words that would replay in her memory for the rest of her life. "Thank you for protecting me." His voice was so quiet she almost missed it, but the gratitude in those 4 words hit her like a physical blow. She knelt beside the booth, bringing herself to his eye level, and spoke with the gentle authority she'd used with frightened children in war zones and military families dealing with deployment trauma. "You're safe now, sweetheart. The mean man is gone, and he's not coming back." "Promise?" Luca asked, and Sophia saw in his eyes the particular fear of a child who had learned that adults sometimes lied about safety to make themselves feel better. "I promise," Sophia said, and meant it with every fibre of her being. "I will always keep you safe." Luca nodded solemnly, accepting her vow with the gravity it deserved. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Another drawing, this one done in hasty crayon strokes while Derek had been terrorizing the other diners. "I drew this for you," he said shyly, "before the scary man came." Sophia unfolded the paper and felt her breath catch. It was a picture of 3 figures, a tall man in a dark suit, a small boy with brown hair, and a woman in white. They were holding hands and standing in front of something that might have been a house or might have been a castle. Above their heads, Luca had drawn a yellow sun with rays extending in all directions. A family. He had drawn them as a family. It's beautiful," Sophia whispered, and she meant it. "Thank you." She was still staring at the drawing when Matteo's voice cut through her emotional fog like a blade through silk. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" Sophia looked up to find him watching her with an expression that was part curiosity, part calculation, and part something else she couldn't quite identify. Respect, maybe, or recognition. "I don't know what you mean," she said automatically, falling back into the protective habit of deflection that had kept her employed for 8 months. Matteo's smile was razor-thin and didn't reach his eyes. "The pressure point technique you used on his wrist, the way you redirected his momentum, the tactical awareness that let you catalogue every detail about him while serving other tables. That's not waitress training, Sophia." Hearing her name in his voice sent an electric shock through her nervous system. He had been watching her, studying her, cataloguing her own details with the same systematic attention she'd applied to Derek. "I took some self-defense classes," she said weakly. 8 years of them?" Matteo asked quietly. "With the United States Army Special Forces." The words hit Sophia like a sniper's bullet, unexpected, precise, and devastating in their accuracy. Her carefully constructed civilian identity crumbled around her like a house of cards in a hurricane. How did you—" "Your stance, your breathing control, the way you assessed threats and controlled the situation. You're not just a waitress, Sophia Moreau. You're a soldier." Sophia's hands began to shake for the first time since the confrontation began. Not from fear she could handle, but from the terrifying realization that Matteo Santangelo knew exactly who she was, had always known perhaps, and had been waiting for her to reveal herself. "I used to be," she whispered. "I'm not anymore." "No," Matteo said, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "You'll always be a soldier. Tonight proved that. The question is, what kind of war are you willing to fight?" Sophia looked down at Luca, who was colouring quietly on a fresh placemat, his crisis forgotten in the way that children could compartmentalise trauma when the immediate threat was neutralised. This boy who had drawn them as a family. This boy who had thanked her for protecting him. This boy who might need protecting again. When she looked back up at Matteo, she saw something in his dark eyes that made her pulse quicken, with possibilities she didn't dare name. "What are you asking me?" she whispered. Matteo Santangelo smiled, and Sophia understood that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't imagine. "I'm asking if you want to stop being invisible," he said, permanently. The restaurant returned to its normal rhythm with the peculiar resilience of a place that had survived 40 years of neighbourhood changes, economic downturns, and the occasional crisis that reminded everyone why Romano's had outlasted 3 generations of competitors. Maria emerged from the kitchen with a fresh pot of coffee and the kind of maternal efficiency that treated emotional trauma like spilled marinara sauce, something to be cleaned up quickly before it stained permanently. She refilled cups, redistributed silverware, and murmured soothing platitudes in Italian to the few customers who had witnessed the confrontation and chosen to stay for dessert rather than flee. Sophia watched this restoration of normalcy with the detached fascination of someone whose world had just shifted on its axis. 20 minutes ago, she had been a waitress serving coffee and deflecting the casual cruelties that came with the uniform. Now she was sitting across from Matteo Santangelo while his son coloured between them, discussing offers that could change everything or destroy what little stability she'd managed to build. "You don't have to answer tonight," Matteo said, his voice pitched low enough to carry only to her ears. "But you should know that what happened here changes things, for all of us." Sophia glanced around the dining room, noting how the other patrons avoided making eye contact with their table. Whether from respect, fear, or simple social awkwardness, she couldn't tell. But the bubble of privacy around them felt as solid as bulletproof glass. "Changes them how?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "Derek Walsh wasn't just some drunk businessman," Matteo replied, his fingers drumming a slow rhythm on the tablecloth. "Cromwell Investment Management has been laundering money for the Volkov organisation for 3 years. Russian mob. They've been looking for leverage against my family, ways to gather intelligence on our operations." Sophia felt her blood chill. "You think he was here for reconnaissance?" "I think he was here to test our security, to see how we respond to provocation, to identify weaknesses." Matteo's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Instead, he found you." The implications cascaded through Sophia's mind like dominoes falling in perfect sequence. Derek's aggressive approach to their table hadn't been random drunk behaviour. It had been a probe designed to provoke a response that could be analysed and exploited. His targeting of Luca hadn't been casual cruelty. It had been a deliberate attempt to find the pressure point that would make Matteo vulnerable. "He was looking for ways to hurt you through your son," Sophia said, the tactical picture clarifying with crystalline precision. "And instead, he discovered that my son is protected by someone with the skills to neutralise a threat without escalating to violence, someone who can read people, gather intelligence, and make problems disappear with surgical precision." Matteo leaned forward slightly, his intensity focused on her like a laser. "Do you understand what that means?" Sophia looked down at Luca, who was adding careful details to his latest masterpiece, a drawing of what appeared to be a dragon wearing an apron and holding a coffee pot. Even in his art he was finding ways to make her part of his story. "It means I can't go back to being invisible," she said quietly. No, it means you never were invisible, not to the people who matter. Matteo's voice carried absolute certainty. My son saw you from the first night. I saw you from the first night. Tonight the Volkovs saw you too. The weight of that reality settled on Sophia's shoulders like armour she hadn't realised she was already wearing. There was no hiding anymore, no pretending to be just another face in the service industry crowd. She had revealed herself, and that revelation had consequences that extended far beyond her personal comfort zone. "What exactly are you offering me?" she asked, though she suspected the answer would terrify and tempt her in equal measure. "Protection. For you and your mother. A salary that would cover her care at the best facility in the state, with enough left over to ensure you never have to count tips again." Matteo's voice was businessman crisp, but his eyes remained focused on her face, cataloguing her reactions. "In exchange, you become what you already are, Luca's guardian." Sophia's breath caught. His bodyguard? His protector? His companion? His... Matteo paused, seeming to choose his words with unusual care. "His family, the role you've already been filling, but with the resources and authority to do it properly." On cue, Luca looked up from his drawing and smiled at Sophia with the particular radiance that children reserved for adults who made them feel safe. "Fia, do you think dragons like hot chocolate?" "I think dragons love hot chocolate," Sophia replied automatically, her heart clenching at his casual use of the nickname, "especially if it has extra marshmallows." "That's what I thought," Luca said solemnly, and returned to his artwork with the satisfaction of someone whose worldview had been validated by reliable authority. Matteo watched this exchange with an expression that Sophia couldn't quite read. Satisfaction, perhaps, or relief at seeing confirmation of something he had already suspected. "He trusts you completely," Matteo observed. "Do you know how rare that is? How long it's taken him to feel safe with anyone since his mother died?" Sophia felt tears prick at her eyes, sudden and unexpected. "He's a special boy." "He is, and he deserves to have someone in his life who will fight for him the way you fought tonight, someone who will stand between him and anyone who tries to hurt him." Matteo's voice dropped to a whisper that carried the weight of a father's desperation. "I can protect him from bullets and bombs and business rivals, but I can't protect him from the kind of everyday cruelty that Derek Walsh represents. I can't be with him every moment of every day." Sophia understood what he wasn't saying, that wealth and power had limits, that even a man who commanded soldiers and territory and respect couldn't shield his child from every sharp edge the world might offer, that sometimes the most effective protection came not from intimidation or violence, but from the simple presence of someone who cared enough to step into harm's way. "Where would we live?" she heard herself ask, and realised that the question itself was an answer. "My compound has a guest wing, separate entrance, complete privacy, but close enough that you could reach Luca in seconds if needed. Your mother would have her own suite, with full-time nursing care if her condition progresses." Matteo's offer was delivered with the practised efficiency of someone who had learned to anticipate objections and address them preemptively. "And the work itself? What would you expect from me? School pickup, homework supervision, bedtime stories, doctor's appointments, everything Matteo hesitated, then forged ahead. "Everything a mother would do." The word hung in the air between them like a bridge Sophia wasn't sure she was ready to cross. She had spent 3 years running from attachment, from responsibility, from the possibility that caring about someone might hurt as much as losing someone. But looking at Luca's bent head as he concentrated on his dragon drawing, she realised she was already too late. She already cared. She was already attached. She was already responsible. "There's no going back from this," Sophia said, more to herself than to Matteo. "Once I cross this line, once I become part of your world—" "You're already part of our world," Matteo replied gently. "You have been since the moment you remembered how Luca likes his hot chocolate. The question is whether you want to make it official." Sophia looked around Romano's family restaurant one last time, at the checkered tablecloths and plastic grapevines, at the elderly couples sharing tiramisu and young families negotiating with toddlers over vegetable consumption. This had been her refuge for 8 months, her hiding place from a world that had taken too much and given too little in return, but it had never been her home. She looked back at Luca, who had finished his dragon and was now starting work on what appeared to be a castle with suspiciously accurate architectural details. This boy who drew her into his pictures, this boy who had thanked her for protecting him, this boy who needed someone to fight for him against the Derek Walshes of the world. "When would I start?" Sophia asked. Matteo's smile was the first genuinely warm expression she'd seen from him, not the predatory calculation of a man assessing threats, but the relief of a father who had found someone to trust with his most precious treasure. "How about right now?" he said. "Luca, would you like Sophia to come home with us tonight? She could see your room, meet the rest of our family." Luca's head snapped up so fast Sophia was afraid he might strain his neck. "Really? She can come home with us and see my Legos and my books and my fish tank?" "If she wants to," Matteo said carefully, "but only if she wants to." Sophia felt the last of her resistance crumble under the weight of an 8-year-old boy's eager hope. She had spent 3 years trying to disappear, trying to become small and forgettable and safe. But looking at Luca Santangelo's face, she realized that safety wasn't found in invisibility. It was found in being exactly where you were needed most. "I'd love to see your room," Sophia said, and watched joy transform Luca's features like sunrise breaking over a landscape. As Matteo signalled for the check and Luca carefully packed his crayons into their box, Sophia understood that she was about to step through a door that would close behind her forever. She also understood that she had never wanted anything more in her entire life. At precisely 6 a.m. the next morning, Matteo Santangelo sat in his home office reviewing a dossier that had cost him $10,000 and 3 sleepless hours to acquire. The file was comprehensive in the way that only military intelligence could be comprehensive. Every deployment, every commendation, every classified operation that Sophia Moreau had participated in during her 8 years of service. The photographs alone told a story that made Matteo reconsider everything he thought he knew about the woman who had served his coffee and protected his son. There was Sophia at 22, fresh out of Special Forces training, her eyes bright with the particular confidence of someone who believed she could save the world through superior firepower and tactical excellence. There was Sophia at 25, leading a demolitions team through the mountains of Afghanistan, her face lean and focused as she calculated blast radii and structural weak points. There was Sophia at 28, receiving the Bronze Star for valour after her unit had held a strategic position against overwhelming odds for 16 hours straight. And there was Sophia at 29, hollow-eyed and broken, standing beside 5 flag-draped coffins at Arlington National Cemetery. Matteo read the incident report 3 times, each reading adding another layer to his understanding of why the woman in Romano's had perfected the art of invisibility. Sophia's unit had been conducting a routine patrol in Helmand Province when their convoy hit an improvised explosive device. The blast had killed her teammates instantly, men and women she had served with for 3 years, trained with, trusted with her life on a daily basis. Sophia had survived because she had been riding in the rear vehicle, tasked with communications duty that day instead of point reconnaissance. Survivor's guilt, the psychologist's report noted, severe PTSD, hypervigilance, inability to form lasting personal attachments due to fear of loss. The woman who had stepped between Derek Walsh and his son wasn't just a soldier. She was a soldier who had lost everything that mattered to her and spent 3 years learning to live with that loss by ensuring nothing would ever matter that much again. Until last night, when she had chosen to matter to his son, and in doing so had revealed exactly how dangerous she could be when something finally mattered to her again. The civilian section of the dossier was harder to read than the military records. 3 years of jobs lost due to panic attacks and hypervigilance. Employers who complained about her attitude problem and inability to work well with others. A string of cheap apartments in progressively worse neighbourhoods as her savings dwindled and her prospects narrowed. Her mother's medical records painted an even grimmer picture. Early onset dementia, progressing rapidly. Medical bills that exceeded $60,000 in the past year alone. A woman who had sacrificed everything for her country, watching her mother slip away one memory at a time while she counted tips and served coffee to people who looked through her like she was furniture. The financials were the most devastating section of all. Sophia Moreau had $1,100 in her checking account, $7,000 in credit card debt, and a monthly income that fell short of her mother's care expenses by almost $1,500. She was 3 months behind on rent, 2 weeks away from having her utilities shut off, and exactly one medical emergency away from complete financial collapse. She had been drowning slowly for 3 years, maintaining her dignity and her mother's care through sheer force of will and the kind of stubborn pride that kept soldiers fighting long after logical people would have surrendered. Matteo closed the file and stared out the window of his study, watching the sunrise paint his compound's security walls in shades of gold and amber. He had built his life around understanding leverage. Who needed what? Who feared what? Who would do anything to protect what mattered most to them? It was a skill set that had made him wealthy and powerful and feared throughout the northeastern corridor. But Sophia Moreau had protecting his son for free, not because she needed the money, though she desperately did, but because Luca had smiled at her and asked for extra marshmallows and made her remember what it felt like to be needed by someone innocent. She had revealed her true capabilities not for strategic advantage, but to shield an 8-year-old boy from a drunk bully's cruelty. Had risked her anonymity, her carefully constructed civilian identity, her hard-won invisibility, because something in her soldier's heart couldn't stand to watch a child suffer. The revelation was as humbling as it was terrifying. Matteo had spent 2 decades surrounding himself with people whose loyalty could be bought, whose services could be contracted, whose allegiance lasted exactly as long as their paychecks cleared. But Sophia's protection of Luca hadn't been transactional. It had been instinctive, maternal. The thought should have comforted him. Instead, it filled him with a cold dread that had nothing to do with business rivals or territorial disputes. Because a woman who would risk everything to protect his son was exactly the kind of weakness his enemies would exploit without hesitation. A soft knock on his door interrupted his brooding. "Come in." Vincent Caruso, his head of security, entered with the precise military bearing that had made him indispensable for the past 5 years. Former Marine, decorated veteran, absolutely ruthless when circumstances required it. Matteo trusted him with everything, his business, his home, his life. Most importantly, he trusted him with Luca. "Boss," Vincent said, settling into the leather chair across from Matteo's desk. "I heard there was some excitement at Romano's last night. Everything okay?" Matteo studied his security chief's expression, noting the casual concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. Vincent had sources throughout the city: bartenders, waitresses, cab drivers, hotel concierges. If something happened in his territory, Vincent heard about it within hours. "Drunk businessman got aggressive," Matteo said carefully. "Sophia handled it." "Sophia?" Vincent's eyebrows rose slightly. "The waitress. Handled it how?" "Professionally, efficiently, without escalating to violence or attracting unwanted attention." Matteo kept his voice neutral, providing information without revealing the depth of what he'd witnessed. "Impressive composure under pressure." Vincent nodded, making mental notes with the systematic attention of someone whose job was anticipating problems before they developed. "Want me to look into this businessman? Make sure he doesn't become a repeat problem?" "Already handled," Matteo replied. "But I do want you to run a full background check on Sophia Moreau. I'm considering offering her a position." "What kind of position?" Vincent's question carried the edge of professional skepticism. He had been the one to recommend the previous nannies, the tutors, the housekeepers who came and went with predictable regularity when they realised that working for the Santangelo family meant signing non-disclosure agreements and submitting to security clearances. Luca's companion, someone to handle school, activities, day-to-day care when I'm travelling. Matteo delivered the half-truth with practised ease. No need to mention combat training or tactical awareness, or the way Sophia had neutralised a threat without breaking stride. He's comfortable with her, that's rare. I'll get right on it, Vincent said, though something in his expression suggested he already suspected there was more to the story. Anything specific I should focus on? Everything, Matteo said. I need to know who she is, where she comes from, what she's capable of. If she's going to be around my son, I need complete transparency. Vincent nodded and rose to leave, then paused at the door. Boss, you want my advice? Always. Be careful with this one. Woman who can handle herself in a crisis. Sometimes that kind of strength comes with the kind of damage that makes people unpredictable. Vincent's voice carried the weight of experience. Just something to keep in mind. After Vincent left, Matteo returned his attention to Sophia's file. The warning was well-intentioned and completely accurate. Damaged soldiers could be volatile, unreliable, dangerous to themselves and others when their careful control finally snapped. But looking at the photograph of Sophia standing beside those 5 coffins, Matteo understood something that Vincent's tactical analysis had missed. Sophia Moreau wasn't dangerous because she was damaged. She was dangerous because she was healing. And a soldier who had something to fight for again was the most lethal weapon in any arsenal. The question was whether that weapon would ultimately be pointed in his direction, or whether he could earn the kind of loyalty that had made her willing to die for strangers in Afghanistan and fight for his son in a restaurant in Queens. Matteo picked up his phone and dialed Vincent's number. "Change of plans," he said when Vincent answered. "I want that background check expedited. Full report by noon." Something wrong? Matteo looked out at his compound's walls again, calculating angles and sight lines and the dozen ways an enemy could breach his carefully constructed security. Sophia Moreau represented either the solution to his family's vulnerability or the greatest threat to their survival. He was about to find out which. "Nothing wrong," he said finally, "just covering all the bases." But as he ended the call and returned to studying the photographs of the woman who had protected his son, Matteo Santangelo couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to discover there were some bases that no amount of money or planning could cover. 2 days later, Sophia stood in the employee parking lot behind Romano's family restaurant, staring at the envelope that would either save her life or destroy it completely. The paper was heavy, expensive, the kind that announced its importance through weight and texture rather than flashy design. Inside was a formal offer of employment from Santangelo Family Enterprises, outlining salary, benefits, and living arrangements with the clinical precision of a contract negotiated by lawyers who charged more per hour than Sophia made in a month. The numbers were impossible. The salary alone would cover her mother's care at the finest facility in the state, with enough left over to eliminate her debt and build the kind of financial security she hadn't dared dream about since her discharge from the military. Medical coverage, dental, vision, life insurance, benefits that would have been generous for a corporate executive, never mind someone whose previous job had involved serving coffee and deflecting casual cruelty from strangers. But it was the personal note, handwritten on letterhead that probably cost more than her rent, that made her hands shake as she read it for the 3rd time. "Sophia, Luca hasn't stopped talking about you since Friday night. He wants to know when you're coming to see his room, his fish tank, his collection of books about dragons. He's already drawn you 17 more pictures. I'm not asking you to save us. I'm asking if you'll let us save you. The decision is entirely yours. No pressure, no consequences if you decline. But if you accept, know that you'll be family from the moment you walk through our door." Monsieur Sophia folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. acutely aware that every choice in her life had led to this moment of impossible possibility. 3 years ago, she had been Staff Sergeant Sophia Moreau, leading soldiers through hostile territory and making decisions that kept people alive. 2 years ago, she had been a broken veteran, learning that courage meant nothing in a civilian world that had no use for warriors who couldn't stop fighting invisible enemies. Now she was being offered the chance to be both, soldier and saviour, protector and protected, the guardian of a boy who needed someone to stand between him and a world that would always be more dangerous than it appeared. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mercy General Hospital. "Mrs. Moreau's condition has deteriorated. Please call to discuss adjusted care options." The arithmetic was simple and brutal. Without this job, her mother would be moved to a state facility within the month, the kind of place where dignity went to die and families visited out of obligation rather than hope, where the staff was overworked and underpaid and the patients were reduced to problems to be managed rather than people to be cared for. Sophia closed her eyes and made the decision that would reshape every day for the rest of her life. She called the number on the letterhead. Matteo answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the particular warmth reserved for calls he'd been hoping to receive. "Sophia?" "I accept," she said without preamble. "When do you need me to start?" "Today, if you're willing. Luca has a paediatrician appointment at 3, and I have a business meeting I can't reschedule." Matteo's relief was audible even through the phone connection. "But first, there are some things we need to discuss. Logistics, boundaries, ground rules." "I'm listening." "Not over the phone. Can you meet me at Romano's in an hour? We'll talk, sign papers, and then—" Matteo paused, and Sophia heard something in his voice that sounded almost like nervousness. "Then you can come home." Home. The word hit her like a physical blow, carrying implications she wasn't ready to examine. When had she stopped having a home and started simply having places where she slept between obligations? "I'll be there," Sophia said. An hour later, she was sitting across from Matteo in the same booth where Derek Walsh had made his catastrophic miscalculation, watching him spread documents across the red-checkered tablecloth with the systematic attention of someone who had learned that details mattered more than good intentions. "Employment contract," he said, sliding the first set of papers toward her. "Standard terms, but with some additions specific to your role. Non-disclosure agreements are non-negotiable. What you see and hear in my home stays in my home. Security protocols are outlined on pages 12 through 15. Emergency procedures start on page 20. Sophia scanned the documents, noting clauses that went far beyond typical domestic employment. Background checks for anyone she brought onto the property, restrictions on photography and social media, protocols for handling suspicious packages, unexpected visitors, and security incidents that were described in language that made them sound routine rather than terrifying. "This isn't just about taking care of Luca," Sophia observed. "No," Matteo agreed. "It's about taking care of Luca in a world where people might try to hurt him to get to me, where routine precautions can mean the difference between a normal childhood and a tragedy that destroys everyone involved." Sophia looked up from the contracts to meet his eyes. "Are you asking me to be his bodyguard or his nanny?" "Both. Neither. I'm asking you to be what you already are, someone who loves him enough to fight for him." Matteo's voice carried absolute sincerity. "The tactical training is a bonus. The maternal instincts are essential." Sophia signed the papers without reading the remaining 23 pages, trusting that a man who had spent 45 years navigating dangerous waters wouldn't sink the ship by cheating the person tasked with protecting his most precious cargo. Matteo produced a second envelope, this one containing keys, security codes, and photographs of the compound layout. "Your quarters are in the east wing. 2 bedrooms, full kitchen, separate entrance. Your mother's suite is adjacent, with a hospital bed and full medical monitoring equipment already installed." "Already installed?" Sophia blinked. "But I just accepted an hour ago." "I had it set up yesterday," Matteo admitted. "I was confident you'd say yes." "That confident in your powers of persuasion?" Matteo's smile was soft and genuine. That confident in your heart. The words settled between them like a bridge. Sophia wasn't sure she was ready to cross. This man had looked at her serving coffee and seen a soldier, had watched her protect his son and recognized something worth investing in, had offered her not just employment, but belonging, not just a job, but a purpose that aligned with everything she'd lost when her unit died in a desert she still saw in her nightmares. "There's something else," Matteo said, producing a final document, medical power of attorney for your mother. "I've arranged for Dr. Patricia Weber from Mount Sinai to consult on her case. She's one of the foremost experts in dementia care in the country." Sophia's vision blurred. "I can't afford—" "You're not paying, I am. Consider it a signing bonus." Matteo's voice was matter-of-fact, as if arranging world-class medical care was as routine as ordering coffee. "Your mother deserves the best possible care, and you deserve the peace of mind that comes with knowing she's getting it." Sophia stared at the documents through tears that threatened to spill over completely. 3 years of struggling, of choosing between her mother's medications and her own meals, of lying awake calculating impossible arithmetic and finding no solutions that didn't require miracles. And here was Matteo Santangelo offering miracles like they were standard employment benefits. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you doing this?" Matteo was quiet for a long moment, his eyes focused on something beyond the restaurant's windows. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a father's desperation and a widower's hope. "Because Luca drew you into our family before I had the courage to ask. Because you protected him when you had every reason to stay invisible. Because—" He met her eyes with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Because some people come into your life and make you remember who you used to be before everything went wrong." The silence that followed was heavy with possibilities neither of them was quite ready to name. Sophia felt the familiar sensation of standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that the next step would either be flight or fall, but unable to remain balanced on the precipice forever. "When do I meet the rest of your family?" she asked, choosing flight. Matteo's relief was palpable. "Right now, if you're ready. Luca is waiting at home with Mrs. Chen, our housekeeper. He's been practicing his questions for you all morning." "Questions?" "About dragons. About whether you prefer chocolate chip cookies or oatmeal raisin. About whether you'll read him stories before bed and help him feed his fish." Matteo stood and extended his hand to her. "About whether you'll stay." Sophia looked at his outstretched hand, scarred from violence she could only imagine, steady from confidence she envied, offering her a future she had never dared hope for. She took it, and in doing so, Sophia Moreau finally understood what it meant to come home. The Santangelo compound looked like a fortress disguised as a luxury estate, and Sophia understood immediately why Matteo's son needed someone willing to die for him. 12-foot walls topped with decorative ironwork that concealed surveillance cameras, gates that appeared ornamental but were reinforced steel wrapped in bronze facades, gardens that offered beauty and clear sight lines in equal measure. Every aesthetic choice served a dual purpose, and every comfort came with a calculated understanding that comfort was a privilege that had to be defended. Sophia's quarters in the East Wing were larger than any apartment she'd rented in the past 5 years, furnished with the kind of casual elegance that announced wealth without shouting it. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of gardens that were probably lovely when you weren't automatically calculating sniper positions and approach vectors. A kitchen stocked with provisions she hadn't been able to afford since her discharge. A bedroom with Egyptian cotton sheets and blackout curtains for someone who understood the value of undisturbed sleep. But it was the adjoining suite prepared for her mother that broke her carefully maintained composure completely. The hospital bed was positioned to catch morning sunlight but avoid afternoon glare. Medical monitoring equipment hummed quietly in corners, professional but unobtrusive. A sitting area with comfortable chairs faced a television programmed with her mother's favourite classic movies. Photographs of their family, Sophia's father in his army dress uniform, Sophia herself at her military graduation, happier times before disease and war stole their certainties, were arranged on side tables with the kind of thoughtful care that spoke of personal attention rather than hired decorating. Matteo had created a space where her mother could maintain dignity while receiving the care she needed, where Sophia could visit without the crushing guilt that came from watching someone you loved diminish in surroundings that reflected their reduced circumstances rather than their enduring humanity. Mrs. Chen prepared the rooms herself, Matteo said quietly, watching Sophia absorb the implications of his investment in her family's comfort. She lost her own mother to Alzheimer's 3 years ago. She understands what matters. Sophia nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. 3 hours ago, she had been counting tips in a restaurant bathroom, wondering if she could afford both her mother's medication and her own dinner. Now she was standing in accommodations that exceeded her wildest hopes, offered by a man who somehow understood that dignity mattered more than luxury when you were watching someone forget how to be themselves. "Where is Luca?" she asked when she could speak again. "Waiting in his room. He wanted to show you his fish tank first, then his books, then his Lego collection. He's planned the entire tour." Matteo's smile carried paternal pride and relief in equal measure. He's been practicing his conversation topics. Dragons feature prominently. Sophia followed him through corridors lined with artwork that probably cost more than most people's houses, noting how every turn offered tactical advantages and every room had multiple exits. The compound was beautiful, but it was also a fortress, and everyone who lived here understood the difference between security and paranoia. Luca's bedroom was a child's paradise wrapped in a parent's worst fears. Bunk beds designed for sleepovers he would never have. Toys that required supervision because playmates might not be who they seemed. Books about adventures he would never experience because adventure, for him, meant danger to his father's empire. But when Luca looked up from the elaborate fish tank he'd been tending and saw Sophia in his doorway, his face transformed with joy so pure it made her chest ache. "Fia!" He ran to her with the uninhibited enthusiasm of a child who had learned to trust cautiously but completely. "You came! You really came! Do you want to meet Napoleon?" "Napoleon?" Sophia knelt to his eye level, the gesture now automatic between them. "My better fish. Papa let me name him. He's very fierce but also very lonely, like real Napoleon probably was." Luca took her hand with the casual intimacy of someone who had already claimed her as family. "Come see." For the next hour, Sophia received the complete tour with the solemnity it deserved. Napoleon was indeed magnificent, scarlet and gold with fins that flowed like silk. The book collection was impressive for a child twice Luca's age, heavy on dragons and knights and stories where brave people protected those who needed protecting. The Lego constructions were architectural marvels, castles with strategic defensive positions, modern buildings with multiple escape routes, vehicles designed for speed rather than comfort. Everything in Luca's world was beautiful and safe and tinged with the understanding that beauty and safety were privileges that required constant vigilance to maintain. "Papa says you're going to live here now," Luca said as they sat on his bedroom floor, constructing what he assured her was a dragon-proof fortress. "Is that true?" "If you want me to," Sophia replied carefully. "Would you like that?" Luca's expression grew serious with the weight of a question he'd obviously been rehearsing. "Will you read me stories before bed and help me feed Napoleon and make hot chocolate when I have bad dreams?" "Of course," Sophia said, meaning it completely. "And will you stay even if scary men come and try to hurt Papa?" Luca's voice dropped to a whisper, and Sophia understood that this was the question that mattered most. "Will you protect me like you protected me at the restaurant?" Sophia felt something crack open in her chest, some fortress wall she'd built around the part of herself that remembered what it meant to be needed by someone innocent. Looking into Luca's enormous brown eyes, she made the same promise she'd made to every soldier under her command, every civilian she'd sworn to protect, every person who had trusted her with their survival. "I will always keep you safe," she said solemnly, "no matter what. That's a soldier's promise, and soldiers' promises are forever." Luca nodded with the gravity of someone who understood that promises mattered more when they came from people who knew how to keep them. Then he threw his arms around her neck in a hug that smelled like strawberry shampoo and childhood and the particular sweetness of trust freely given. "I love you, Fia," he whispered against her shoulder. Sophia's world tilted on its axis for the second time in a week. "I love you too, sweetheart." Over Luca's shoulder she saw Matteo standing in the doorway, his expression unguarded for once. Vulnerable. He was watching his son find healing in her arms, and she could see the moment when protective gratitude transformed into something more complicated, more dangerous, more impossible to ignore. The air between them crackled with possibilities neither was ready to name. Sophia had spent 3 years learning to live without attachments, without responsibilities that could hurt when they were taken away. She had perfected the art of caring just enough to be professional, but not enough to be broken when assignments ended, or relationships failed, or people moved on to lives that didn't require her services. But looking at Luca's trust and seeing recognition in Matteo's eyes, Sophia understood that those careful defences were already crumbling. She was falling in love with this boy who drew her into his pictures, with this man who had seen her heart before she'd shown it to him, with this family that had been broken and was learning to be whole again. And for the first time in 3 years, Sophia Moreau wasn't afraid of falling. She was afraid of what she might do to anyone who tried to catch her. Later that evening, after Luca had been fed and bathed and read to sleep with stories about brave dragons who protected their treasures, Sophia found herself in the kitchen, making hot chocolate she didn't need while processing emotions she hadn't expected. Matteo appeared in the doorway like a shadow, moving with the predatory grace that had probably saved his life more times than she wanted to calculate. "He's never told anyone he loved them except his mother and me." "He's a special boy," Sophia replied, her hands steady on the saucepan, despite the emotional earthquake happening behind her ribs. "He is, and he has excellent instincts about people." Matteo moved closer, his presence filling the kitchen with heat and possibility. "Just like his father." Sophia turned to face him, acutely aware that they were alone, for the first time since she'd stepped between Derek Walsh and his son. The compound was quiet around them, security staff at their posts, household staff in their quarters, Luca safe in his bed 3 doors away. It was the kind of domestic intimacy she hadn't experienced since before her deployment, when normal people shared normal moments in normal kitchens without calculating threat assessments or exit strategies. "This is dangerous," she said quietly. "What is?" Matteo asked, though his eyes suggested he already knew. "This. Us. Whatever this is becoming." Sophia gestured between them, encompassing the charged silence and unspoken recognition, and the way her pulse quickened when he looked at her like she was something rare and worth protecting. "I'm here for Luca." "You are," Matteo agreed, "but you're here for other reasons too." The words hung between them like a challenge, an invitation, a line they could cross or retreat from with equal justification. Sophia had spent her adult life making tactical decisions under pressure, calculating risks and rewards and the probability of success versus the cost of failure. But standing in Matteo Sant'Angelo's kitchen, watching him watch her with eyes that saw everything she'd tried to hide, Sophia realized that some decisions couldn't be made tactically. Some decisions had to be made with the heart, and her heart, treacherous and hopeful and alive for the first time in 3 years, was already choosing him.